What's up, my wizards? It's Dev, aka the Sandman from Mtg, Me Gusta La Bruja, and I'm letting the main down today so we can discuss 10 cards from Core Set 2021 that aren't getting enough attention. Now, this is normally the part of the Sleepers video where I say something akin to like, oh, it was really hard to make this list because everyone's paying attention to this set and there's so much hype. Not really this time around. It doesn't really apply. It was easier to make this list than usual because most of the hype in the set is revolved around all the ridiculous reprints that Wizards has given us. And thanks for those. Those are good. But at the same time, as a consequence, that has allowed a lot of cards to slip well up under the radar, and we need to talk about them. So today, it's your favorite video, and it's my favorite video. Top 10 Core Set 2021 Sleepers. Let's go ahead and kick it off here with the honorable mention. Now, the Figure 4 Leg Lock, the Sharpshooter, the Bank Statement. What do these all have in common? They're all enthralling holds. Now, the only reason I bring this card up is A, I wanted to make that joke, I'm not going to lie, but B, anytime you see control magic in any form, you should probably pay some attention to it. This costs a mana more and can only nab tapped creatures, but it's still worth remembering that this card is available to us in this format. It's obviously no Agent of Treachery, but we have seen that stealing stuff can be really good in this format, even if it can't steal all the stuff that Agent can. You can't blink it like he can in Agent of Treachery, but I still think that 5 mana isn't too steep for an effect like this, so at least remember it when you're building your sideboards. But let's go ahead and get into the actual list here with number 10, a card that's definitely been overlooked, and that's not an overstatement. Experimental Overload. And I have been doing a lot of experimenting with this card. Now, I get that this kind of looks like an expensive version of Invade the City, a card that sees absolutely no play, and for good reason, but I still kind of like the look of this thing, especially in a deck that has access to Teferi, allowing you to cast this at instant speed, at which case, it does a pretty good impression of Torrential Gearhulk if you have enough open mana. It makes a big body and allows you to recast a spell. If you get an instant back, you can recast it right then and there. Again, all of this requires Teferi, but I could see this being a really interesting one of or two of for a deck like Jeskai Control. It'd be a neat late game play as well, but a better home for it, I think, would be a deck like Temur Reclamation, because in that deck, all your lands untap at the end of your turn, so you're not really punished for playing a sorcery. And late in the game, this can sometimes just get back a copy of Expansion Explosion and effectively win the game for you. And if it doesn't, it at least created a big body. At the end of the day, being able to get back an instant or sorcery from your yard is always an underrated and powerful ability, and I wouldn't be surprised if this ended up as a one-of in some very good decks. Now, number 9 is a card that looks like a 4-mana do-nothing enchantment, but I do have a few insights about Teferi's Ageless Insight. Now, the investment in this is real, but it does pay off if you have Planeswalkers that can tick up or down to draw cards when this enters the battlefield at no mana cost to you. If you have a Teferi on turn 3, for instance, you can tick it down when you play this on turn 4 and draw 2 cards. However, I understand that very often you'll play Teferi on turn 3, tick it down. When you play this on turn 4, you're probably not going to be able to tick down Tef again. But that's where a card like, say, the Royal Scions comes in. This ticks up to draw you cards at, again, no mana cost to you. So turn 3 Royal Scions, turn 4 this. Draw 2, discard 1 is at least a decent play line. But you could also play this on turn 5 and leave mana up for an opt that now draws you 2 cards. That's pretty sweet. Once you have this in play, though, you can do really cool stuff like Chemister's Insight, for instance, to draw 4 cards, and then Insight again to draw another 4 cards. Seems pretty good to me, but especially with stuff that draws a bunch of cards all at one time. For instance, I'll bring up Expansion Explosion again. Effectively drawing twice the number of cards off of Expansion Explosion could either win you the game or just mill your opponent out all at one time. Same thing's true of Finale of Revelation, for instance. Just anything with X in the cost that draws you cards, like Hydroid Krasis, another good example, will draw you twice as many cards, and that can win you the game off of things like Thassa's Oracle, for instance. And bringing up Thassa's Oracle, there's also a deck I'm really excited about putting this in. The Nyx Lotus deck, the mono blue Nyx Lotus deck, because this powers up Gadwick by double the amount. That means that a Gadwick that you want to draw your entire library costs effectively half the mana it would normally cost. And that powers up the deck a lot while also giving it 2 blue devotion and a hard to deal with permanent type. So there's a lot that I like about this, and a few decks I think it could go into day one. Even if they're not the most powerful decks in the world, I think this does make them a little bit more powerful. And in the case of Mono Blue Lotus, I think that might actually matter a little bit. Now, number 8 actually kind of dovetails from number 9 because I'm going to mention some of the same cards when I talk about Jorial Mwanvuli Recluse. Now, even though it's been a couple of weeks since this card previewed, I'm still stoked about a Monvuli reference. Happy for that, but there's so much this works with in blue and green. There's some stuff it works with in mono green, but blue is definitely the color to pair with it, because you get things like Euro. If you play this on turn 2 into a turn 3 Euro leaves behind a body for once on turn 3, which is actually one of the best things you could do with this, but it also works well with main phase Growth Spiral, works well with Chemister's Insight, just like Teferi's Ageless Insight, works well with Planeswalkers, obviously. If you play a Teferi on turn 3 and tick down to return something to their hand, well, then you also get a 2/2, which is a really sweet deal, if you're asking me. But, you know, things like Hydroid Krasis in blue-green also work really well with Jolreal. So there's just so many things you could do while playing powerful cards you're going to play anyway, that you might as well incorporate this into your deck and play it as a 2-drop. Those decks don't really have access to very powerful 2-drops, but I could see this, if it only makes, 1 or 2 cats for you, still being a very playable 2-drop in these blue-green decks. Also note that a lot of the cards that I've talked about in this entry, Euro, Growth Spiral, they also ramp you, which makes it so that you can actually activate Jolreal's ability a lot quicker than you would in other decks. And that's really sweet, because once you have, 5-6 cards in your hand, suddenly your entire team gets huge. And once you have a Nissa out, it is really easy to activate this ability, make all your forests enormous, and just get in. Now, number 7 is a card that I've been peering at this whole time, but I think a lot of players think it's abysmal. Have you guessed it yet? Number 7 is Peer into the Abyss. Now, I'll agree that this card does cost an awful lot of mana, and I wasn't excited about it at first, but you do some thinking, and there's some real combo potential with this card. First of all, Teferi's Tutelage is the first thing I want to bring up. This will probably end up milling your opponent out. Same thing's true of Underworld Dreams, which doesn't mill them out, but probably kills them off of damage entirely if you make them draw those cards. Plus, they also lose half their life rounded up, so it's entirely likely that if you have an Underworld Dreams out, you just one-shot them with a Peer into the Abyss. So there's a couple of really cool things you can do with this card, and honestly, it ain't too hard to ramp to 7 mana in this format. We're going to try it. Now, number 6, I don't really have a joke for it, and that's because it's a very serious card. Number 6 is Chandra's Pyreling. Pay attention to this card, because it's actually ridiculous. Well, I think this is much better than a card like Chandra's Spitfire, despite the fact that it lacks evasion. In decks like Cavalcade of Calamity, this is just unbelievable in Cavalcade, but you don't even have to play it in Cavalcade. If you play this on turn 2, there's a wealth of options available to you on turn 3. Double Infuriate is something like 18 damage. That's 3, 6, 7, 8, 9 times 2. Yeah, that is 18 damage. Even Rimrock Knight times 1 just makes this swing for 8 damage by itself. That's unbelievable. Imagine untapping on turn 3 and casting Collision Colossus on this when you swing in with it. The threat of activation on this, as long as you have cards in your hand, is incredibly high. It's like it's just wearing an Embercleave all the time. And even though it doesn't have trample or anything like Embercleave would give it, it's still just a much more serious card than I think a lot of players are giving it credit for. It comes down very, very early and threatens to deal a lot of damage in the very early turns consequently. Now it's time to take a peek at number 5, which is Terror of the Peaks. I hate that this card is even on this sleepers list at all, but I do think it illustrates something very important about modern day Magic. Now this card is the definition of a sleeper, because I think it's going to have to wait to actually see play. 3 mana Teferi just bouncing this feels really bad, and if you pay 5 mana for something that just gets bounced for 0 mana, that's probably going to lose you the game. That kind of tempo is not tenable in standard modern day Magic, right? This card doesn't do anything the turn that it enters the battlefield. For the most part, it will not, at the very least. And that is the mark of a card that very likely won't see play, at least in this standard. But there are some signposts in Core Set 2021 that make us think that maybe Wizards is getting back to fair Magic after this next rotation. That would be nice, because a card like this, I think, would be much more likely to see play. Anytime a Pandemonium effect is available to you in Standard, you have to pay attention to it, because any creature that you play after this is going to create some very good value, even if it only goes face with its damage. That's going to be very, very good. However, even before rotation, this could work somewhat well with, say, Luca. I know they both cost 5 mana, but if you use Luca to exile a creature and spin this up, that technically didn't cost you any mana on the turn that you did it, so you might have more mana left to play creatures. You could also perhaps Neo form into this and still have mana open. There's a couple of ways you can get to this and still have mana left to play creatures. If it does generate any value in that way for you the turn it enters enters the battlefield. I think it's an incredibly powerful card, but there's a lot of fail cases for this in Standard right now, but hopefully there won't be quite as many come the fall, so keep your mind on this card. Now, my number 4 is Maze Mine Tome. And I don't really even have to cut to like a fancy art graphic or anything to talk about this card. So I don't really have much to say other than like, this is better than you think it is, right? Treasure Map? Can I say Treasure Map to you? Another card that people were kind of not really recognizing the power level of during its spoiler season, but it quickly became a Standard mainstay, and I think this could have a similar story. You can blink this in any number of ways to reset the counters on it and keep drawing cards, or you can just gain 4 life when you draw that last card. Pretty sweet. You can also reset it with a Teferi that you have. If you can tick down your Teferi, put it back in your hand, and draw a card, all of that seems good to me. You know, a lot of the blue-white base control decks in this format right now aren't necessarily typical control decks. A lot of them are tap-out control decks, due in large part to not only the fact they have to play Teferi, but the presence of Teferi at large in the format right now. So you have a lot of blue-white control decks that actually tap out to play Teferi, Narset, Elspeth Conquers Death, and a whole bunch of other cards, right? Not every blue deck just leaves mana up on every turn of the game, so I really don't see a world where it's not possible they play this. You've got a lot of blue-white decks that play like the Birth of Melodis in the 2-drop slot. And the Birth of Melodis might be a better card in some situations than this, but if you're already not holding up mana on turn 2, then I think this is probably better. I think this is probably better to just go ahead and invest mana into this, and then invest further mana that you have open into either scrying or drawing. I just think this card is much better than a lot of people are saying it is right now, and maybe they'll realize that before too long, but maybe it'll just pass into obscurity and never see the play it almost certainly deserves to see. Now, number 3 was almost number 1. It really was, but I had to pull back and stay objective, but honestly, if I was being more subjective, I think Shipwreck Dowser might actually be my number 1 sleeper. I am incredibly surprised to have seen like literally zero talk about this card all during preview season. It just looks incredible to me. It does cost a little bit of mana, but there's plenty of ways. You could cheat it into play if you wanted to, but I don't think you necessarily want to cheat this into play. Even for 5 mana, it's not a bad deal, and it's one of the closest things we have to like Eternal Witness in this format right now, in that it's a body that can get stuff back from your graveyard. It never exiles or anything, so that's pretty important, right? You can blink it with things like Thassa. Teferi's Time Twist is particularly good with this because you can keep recurring the Time Twist. Elspeth Conquers Death is pretty nice because you can get this back for no mana, immediately put a card into your hand and have the mana to cast it. I like that. Things like Teferi, that you can bounce it back to your hand with. Same thing goes with Baron. You can use Baron to bounce this back to your hand, draw a card, play it again, and get something else out of your graveyard. Just the ability to recur a removal spell, a card draw spell, anything like that. Or even a sweeper is going to be very important with this card, right? You played a sweeper, then you play your Shipwreck Dowser to put your sweeper back in your hand. Well, if you play Shatter the Sky again and it kills your own Shipwreck Dowser, you don't mind, because you can just play Elspeth Conquers Death. A couple turns later, get your Shipwreck Dowser back. That allows you to get your Shatter back again. There's just a whole lot of really cool little wrinkles about this card, and being able to bring back an instant or sorcery, like I said way earlier in this list, is always an underrated ability that's very, very powerful. And the ability to have it on a body that can blink or recur or bounce or whatever is better than you think it is, especially. This can also just attack when you wanted to, and they've got prowess slapped on there, so whenever you cast the spell you got back, this thing gets a little bit bigger. There's just a lot of really cool things about Dowser, and I don't think people are paying anywhere near enough attention to this card. But on to number 2. I'm not going to lie to you. I have seen the truth. Why aren't people talking about this card? Now, I really only should have to bring up a few cards to justify this card's playability, like Underworld Breach, for instance. It's unbelievable in the Underworld Breach deck. It's also good with Escape to the Wilds, for instance. It's good with Light Up the Stage if you happen to grab it off of Light Up the Stage. It's just 3 cards for 2 mana, and there's plenty of other ways in just Standard alone to cast this without actually having to play it from your hand, right? And that doesn't even count formats like Modern or even Legacy, where this could see some amount of play, because there are just too many ways to cast this without having to play it from your hand. Yawgmoth's Will, anyone? I mean, if you want the OG Underworld Breach, there it is. There's just so many ways to actually profitably cast this. Just the further you go back, the more playable I think this card is. So it's just amazing to me that I haven't seen more people talking about it. But number 1, a card that I already have an exquisite bond with, It's Veto! Hey, Veto! How you doing, Veto? I love this card so much. And even though people are talking about it, I will say the competitive side is not talking about it at all. I have not heard much from the quote-unquote competitive community about this card. So even though there are a whole bunch of filthy cashes, to put it in their terms, a bunch of casuals talking about this card, I will say I don't think that the more serious, hard-headed side of the community is taking this card anywhere near as seriously as they really, really should. First of all, there are some extreme haymaker plays if you have a veto out, like Revenge. The Revenge half of Revival Revenge does count as your life total going up. All of these effects that change your life total in this way do count as gaining life. So this will work in just some cases one-shot your opponent, so there's that. But there's also Plane-Wide Celebration, which can just 16 your opponent if you have a veto out. But if you want something even cheaper, Life Goes On has the potential to just deal 8 damage to your opponent for 1 mana. That's pretty crazy. Hey, maybe you got the Morbid effect on Life Goes On because you sacrificed a Serrated Scorpion, which suddenly does 4 damage when you sacrifice it. That seems pretty good to me if you got a veto out right there. Hey, I know the mana's rough, but if you have a Linden out, imagine. Imagine just swinging with a bunch of creatures, gaining a bunch of life, and also, by the way, dealing like 4 damage. That seems good to me. This doubles up the damage on Cruel Celebrant as well, so it goes in your Aristocrats decks. If you've got a Sorin out, but you can play on curve with this, then it makes all your 1-drop swing for a whole bunch of damage. I assume you went 1-drop on 1, 2 1-drops on turn 2, Veto on 3, Sorin on 4, and suddenly you're dealing all the damage in the world. So that's pretty good play. Hey, while Bishop of Wings is in the format, playing an Angel deals 4 damage to the opponent. That's pretty nice. Conclave Mentor. Make it huge, sacrifice it to something, and then dome your opponent for 8. Sounds nice. Kenrith suddenly has the ability to pump 3 mana into it and have a 10-point life swing, deal 5 damage to your opponent for 3 mana. Creeping Chill suddenly has the ability to kill your opponent if you mill all 4 of them into your graveyard. That seems like it might be important. And oh, by the way, food. Food is also a thing, so sacrificing food is a 6-point life swing if you have out a veto. There's just so much this card does, and I didn't even name most of it. For instance, Heliod's Intervention suddenly does a bunch of damage and gains you a bunch of life. Erebos' Intervention suddenly does like a drain life impression, right? You kill a creature and deal a bunch of damage to the opponent and gain a bunch of life. Just Erebos' Intervention is crazy with this. Oath of Kaya suddenly can hit for 6. It's just... This card is disgusting, and I have not seen enough competitive players really explore the options this card makes available to you. A 3-mana Sanguine Bond is just unbelievable. Even if it's on a body that can be killed, I still am super excited about all the potential plays this card sets up. Even the plays that don't kill your opponent in one shot, but there are plenty of plays that do kill your opponent in one shot that a Janklord like me is super excited to have veto in the format. But did I advocate for that last card enough? I think I did. There's even more stuff, though, y'all. There is so much that works with veto. The card's good. I know you know that. I know a lot of you watching this video know that, but not enough people understand that veto is the real. The real, everybody. Veto's so good. Anyway. That's all I got for this one. Just let me know any sleepers that you think I didn't hit down there in the comments section. Remember that the top 25 videos coming up in just a day or two time here. So anything that I didn't put on in this list might actually be on the main list. So if you got a favorite card I didn't mention here, feel free to comment about it. But hey, it might be on the real list. But in any case, just let me know how you felt about all the entries. Anything you have to add to them, I'm all ears. You know, crazy combos are kind of my thing. So let me know down there in the comments section. And then do all the YouTube stuff. Like the video, subscribe to the channel because there's a lot of Core Set 2021 content coming up. It's almost Deck Tech season. If you haven't gotten over to the Patreon yet, I'll leave a link in the description. $1 a month, that'll let you vote on what decks we do this season, all season long, but there's going to be a Patreon poll going up this evening, Monday evening, as I put this video out. So if you haven't done it yet, check that out. Support the channel. Helps me out a lot. But that's pretty much all I've got for this one, so I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.